Hello, this is Alan here with my Milestone 12 review video, and there are lots of topics to go through here. So I'll run through them. First we have our introduction slide, then we go into the maps of Narrows Landing and Skywound Mine, both which have been updated. I talk about a bunch of various new NFTs, such as the Link of the Brittle, the Everlasting Dandelion, in addition to the new Cosmetic hats. Then I have a slide on the lore, which actually describes what the lore is. If you're interested in seeing where all the lore items are, I have a link to my lore guide video in this video's description. Then we go into some various mobs, so the new Goblin Scavenger mob, the new types of Goblin brutes. There's also a complete loot overhaul, which is a very welcome change. There's a series of new crafting recipes, specifically ones to improve progression and to make archery viable. A series of progression changes, which are well suited to improving the progression curve for new players. There are some minor AI changes, and various NPCs also got changed, both in their stats and their appearance. The Skywound mine is now lively and filled with mobs, and I go into some of the new areas there and some various forms of gameplay and strategies. Next up is a review of the leaderboard from the Cut Above event, in addition to what that event was about. Then we focus more on the present, looking at the new NFTs for Dusk of the Broken event, which will be coming out in a couple of days here. Then some potential strategies to help perform well during the Dusk of the Broken event. I go into the mystery chest sale progression and how that correlates with rewards and players. And then into some NFT minting, which was quite a success. Various bugs, and finishing off as per the norm with my final thoughts. I completely redid the labeling of the Narrows Landing map for a few reasons. First off, we now have names of actual areas, including the Rocky Highlands and the Burned Village. The areas where all the various goblins are have changed, so the green goblins in the center there where it says green goblin territory, that used to be yellow goblin territory, so I labeled those appropriately so people know where to go. I removed all the copper and tin locations because those have now moved to Skywound Mine, and I've added the lore locations as red X's that you can see there on the map as well. Here is an updated map of Skywound Mine showing the entrances, the actual in-game names of all the various locations, labeling of the goblin territories for the brown, yellow, and green goblins on both the east side of the map and on the west side of the map. Note on the west side of the map is where the brutes are as well. I also have all of the lore locations marked with red X's, and a significant number of copper and tin deposits which are labeled. Now, just because you see a copper, that doesn't mean a single copper node is there. There could be 10, could be 1, there may not be any if someone already looted it, and there may be some additional nodes other than this. However, this does give a pretty good idea as to where you can find the various nodes. For the most part, the west side of the map is mostly copper, and for the most part, the right side of the map is mostly tin. Let's move on to some new content here. The Link of the Brittle technically came out with the last event. However, we didn't have all of the details at that time. Now, the Link of the Brittle was a reward from the Vexy competition. It was given to the top 235 ranks. This particular NFT is interesting because it's very dangerous to use, however, at the same time, situationally very strong. I personally very much like the item, actually. So the times when you can use this effectively, if you're in a cheese spot, so let's say you're cheesing a brute so they can't attack you back, and there's no other mob mobs attacking, say no archers in the area, then you can use this to do additional damage. The same applies if you have someone tanking and there's no additional mobs dealing damage, you can use this to do additional damage. And the other thing is in range combat. If you can stay out of the range of getting hit, then you don't have to worry about taking damage, and the major issue with this item is it dramatically reduces your protection against pierce, slash, and crush by minus 30%. And in the video we'll see how much minus 30% actually affects you. Now, an interesting thing is that it doesn't actually reduce your protection against any elemental damage. So in the future, when there's mobs that say do molten damage or shadow damage, etc., as long as they don't modify this NFT, then this NFT won't have any disadvantage against those types of mobs. Now, one thing I'm sure you're looking at is 10% damage doesn't seem like a whole lot. And at face value, it isn't. However, 10% additional damage typically translates to more than 10% actual damage dealt. And in some cases, it can be way more than 10% damage dealt. So I'll give a very clear example here. Let's say you're dealing 10 base damage. Mob has 9 resists to your damage, and you end up dealing 1 damage. So your 10 base damage minus their 9 resist. Now you throw on your necklace, so you're doing 10% more damage. 10% more than 10 base damage is 11 damage. And now you deal 2 damage. 11 buff damage minus their 9 resist. So that 10% more damage from the Link of the Brittle actually increased the damage you deal by 100%, from 1 damage to 2 damage. In this video, I show a Goblin Scavenger hitting me, and you can see my health there. It's going down by 1 point at a time. I then equip the Link of the Brittle, and then suddenly you can see my health is going down by 12 points at a time. You can see big chunks. You also see the buff there that shows that it's a debuff. As soon as I remove the Link of the Brittle, the health goes back to just losing 1 at a time. The Everlasting Dandelion. This is a fairly rare item, particularly at the higher rarities. So it was rewarded from a Gala Swap trading competition. The top 3 people got the epic, the ranks 4 to 10 got the rare, and anybody who did any trading whatsoever got non-common beyond that. And interestingly enough, it does stack with the Lesser Potion of Soft Landing, which now gives 30% fall damage resistance. The Lesser Potion of Soft Landing previously gave 50% fall damage resistance. And interestingly enough, the epic gives 20%. Essentially, they nerf the Lesser Potion of Soft Landing by an exact amount that if you got the epic, you got your 50% total resistance back. Now, there is a bit of a caveat to that, and when they were initially released, for about a period of a week, you could actually equip all 3. So 1 in each trinket slot, despite them being the same NFT name, just of different rarity, which gave you a total of 45% base fall resistance, plus you could then add on the potion as well. So you got 75% total fall resistance. And that's still in effect as of now. So as long as you don't unequip those NFTs, and let's say you had all of them, then you could actually get up to 75% fall resistance. Now, the current maximum fall resistance, assuming you didn't do that, is 50%. Of course, the potion plus the epic Dandelion, but there's only a maximum 3 people that can ever get to that point. Now, the fact that these items use the trinket slot is a little unfortunate because during events, typically you want event trinkets to increase your event points. Within events, these are of minimal value. Also, fall damage isn't much of an issue at the present, so the current utility is quite minimal. However, we do know that the team is developing a bunch of parkour, and that certainly does lean towards you falling more, in which case these items will likely become much more beneficial in the future. So in this video, I first equip the Everlasting Dandelion, which shows a fall damage resistance of 15% in addition to the buff, 15% fall damage resistance. I then use my potion of soft landing to give me an additional 30%, which you can see stacks to 45%. Cosmetic hats. This is the first set of cosmetics within Mirandus, and interestingly enough, at the present there are very few ways you can differentiate yourself from another player, which typically wouldn't be too much of a problem in most games because you could just see their name easily. In Mirandus, if they're next to something else that has a name, or unless you're very close to them, you can't actually scroll over and see their name. Most of the way you can identify someone is by how they look, and because there are not a whole lot of items in the game yet, most people tend to look the same. There are a few distinguishing characteristics at this point, and those are mostly in the form of rare items. So the Brute's Club, the Bald Eagle Pet, the Lantern of the Sun, those are items that are fairly rare that help you acknowledge someone. I personally have all three of those. Or if you're a holo. There are not a whole lot of people that play holos, so that's a fairly good characteristic this early on because it's relatively rare. In terms of the supply, the Viridian Bag Hat and the Scarlet Bicocket are both in a supply of 1,000, and they're for sale on the Gala store for a total of $15. Also of note is that the Viridian Bag Hat will be rewarded to the top 5 players in the upcoming November event. Also included was quite the upsell with the Burgundy Burlet, which had a total quantity of 50 and a slightly increased price of $25. Now the devs did say that these supply numbers are not 100% fixed, and even though the Burgundy Burlet sold out, after that fact they did mention they could increase the supply, which personally I think is an absolutely terrible idea, especially for sore items. Hopefully that's not a trend we see in the future, and if it is a planned trend, that they give a little bit of a heads up prior to selling them that this could happen. Another thing which I'm a little disappointed in is the Burgundy Burlet flavor text says an artifact of immense prestige. This ceremonial headpiece signifies authority and immense wealth. Given that, I was expecting they would go on sale and be sold for either in-game Materium or potentially Chaotic Trace, as that would be more of a sign of kind of immense wealth within the game. Personally don't really consider $25 off the store to be signifying immense wealth, but I guess they're going just regards to that particular design from a historical perspective. Either way, I think it was a missed opportunity with this particular hat. So in this video, I'm showcasing all the various hats. So we're starting with the Robin Hood hat, or the Scarlet Bicocket. I then switch over to the Viridian Bag Hat, and you can see that all around. Looks pretty cool, I think. And we'll finish off with the Burgundy Burlet, which I think is the least good looking of all of them, despite the rarity and the most expense. Lore. So on the left hand side here we can show what a completed current lore compendium looks like, which is 17 out of 21 total lore items. The one with the 5 question marks isn't currently in game. And on the right hand side I have the summary of what all of that lore comprises. So I'll go through this here, starting with the foreman's notes. The foreman records how Skywound Mine starts as a risky but promising operation. The rock is fairly unstable, but it's also rich in materium, and the Marquis is pushing everyone to work faster. When they uncover a massive materium stone called the Eye of the Citadel, strange things start happening. Ancient symbols and unbroken seals are found, equipment starts to fail, tunnels collapse, and the workers simply vanish. The mine starts to feel alive and hostile, as though it is punishing them. The Marquis then becomes obsessed, sends mages, elite guards, and even his son Valen into the depths. And finally, goblins overwhelm the mine as darkness closes in. The next one is Letters to a Miner. And this set tells the story of the disaster through personal letters. So L, which is all they're named as, writes to a loved one working in the mine, starting proud and affectionate, but gradually becomes more anxious as rumors spread about the Eye of the Citadel, the curses, rising deaths, and the Marquis losing his sanity. The town darkens, bodies stop returning, and Elle stops receiving replies, eventually being told that their partner is simply gone. Elle then leaves home, buries the last letter, and mourns all the futures the mine stole. The final message, however, flips that perspective. The miner, O, which is the other person they were initially writing to, writes from the doomed mine, full of regret, confirming the Marquis is mad and begging Elle to flee Mirandus and keep their memory safe as they accept they won't survive. And now we'll go on to Valen's last chronicle. A chronicler accompanies Commander Valen and the elite guard down into Skywound mine. The place feels like a wounded, waiting thing rather than just stone. They reach a chamber of illusions and glowing glyphs and try to work on a central seal, but nothing responds. The mine seems to breathe around them. That night, the chronicler sees a strange radiant bird pecking at the stone, only for a larger foul creature to silently kill it. An omen Valen quietly keeps a feather from. Soon after, enemies break through the tunnels, and the chronicler writes his final lines as the defenders are overrun, ending with a short, grim poem about the fallen. So these were summaries of the lore pieces, and I think they did a pretty good job with this lore. It's quite engaging, and I'm interested to see where they're going to continue on with this. My guess is something along the lines of those next 5 question marks, is how that turns into boss of, say, the Skywound mine, controlling whatever, or why we have to attack them, etc. I like where they're going with this. I hope they add more lore to Narrow's Landing as well, and provide names to all of those zones, and hopefully they continue doing this with future zones as well. The Goblin Scavenger. So the Goblin Scavenger, you can see they're imaged on the left, walks on all 4s. They do fairly low pierce damage, enough so that they'll only hit you with 1 damage with a full set of tough leather. And they move quickly and attack quickly, so if they swarm around you and they all start hitting you, even 1 damage a hit starts to add up pretty quickly, especially because they kind of block you, in which cases archers, which tend to do quite a bit more damage, can then start picking you off. Given that they're fairly weak, they tend to be relatively efficient for farming materia. There are other mobs as well that are quite efficient, like the mini bosses, say the Alpha Buck and the Wisp. However, for other mobs, these are about as good as they get. They are found in both Narrow's Landing, kind of all over the map, and they're also found in Skywound Mine, mostly on the east side. So in this video I show a group of green goblin scavengers. In addition, there's also a couple goblin archers. So typically you want to try to pick off the goblin archers first. And I guess I don't really notice that other goblin archer in the background, although he's not actually hitting me because I'm moving enough. I then notice him, so I go pick him off because he does quite a bit more damage than the others. And then finish off with the goblin scavengers. The 3 goblin brute types. So previously there was only a yellow goblin brute. Now they have goblin brutes that match all of the colors of the other goblins. However, what I was previously referring to the brown goblins, now the goblin brute tends to look much more red. Specifically, their hair is completely red. Now, I'm looking at what we should do in terms of equipment when we're fighting these particular mobs. So for tanking, for armor, regardless of who you're fighting against, you should be wearing bronze brigandine armor because they all do crush damage. Now, we have seen images and videos of, say, a green brute with a sword, so I wouldn't be surprised if only the red brute on the far left there becomes the one with the club, and the other ones get, say, a sword and maybe a spear for the yellow or daggers for the yellow. Now, when you're tanking, in terms of what weapons to use, for the red one, you want to use a hammer or a club. The yellow, it's a spear or a club, and the green, it's a sword or a club. The club against the yellow and green seems to do a little bit less damage than a fully decked out set against them. For example, Because you're wearing bronze brigandine, you're not getting the advantage of wearing bronze plate while using the club. However, if you're using a spear, you do get that awaken bonus. And that awaken bonus, because of all the new resistances, tends to do a little bit more damage than the club in that particular case. Now, as a DPS against the red ones, you're going to want to use bronze plate or bronze brigandine. You can always wear bronze brigandine simply because if the brute turns to you and hits you, if you're not wearing bronze brigandine, you're going to take a lot of damage. But if someone's doing a good job tanking, you can ignore that and just use the bronze plate. In terms of weapons, you want to use the hammer or the club. Now for the yellow ones, it's pretty easy because bronze brigandine does the most damage. It also provides the most resistance, and the spear is the best one to use, so you should be using a spear. If you want to use the club because you want to use less durability, then you can use that as well. And for the green ones, for DPS, you're going to want to use tough leather or bronze brigandine and either the sword or the club. Now, if you have a good group, you're cheesing, or if the tank is holding good aggro and there's no ads around you, the DPS can reasonably use Link of the Brittle as well. When you're tanking, you definitely do not want to use Link of the Brittle. Loot changes. So on the left hand side is what the new loot menu looks like, and we can see a few things there. We can see where it says ready to loot. Those are things I can loot. We can see where it's grayed out with a line through it that says it's looted, so I already looted that or somebody else looted it. And where it says the 7 test materium lock, that means that that can be looted in the future, but it's currently assigned to another player. So if that player does not loot it within a period of time, it becomes free-for-all, and then anyone can loot that. Now, in terms of the actual looting itself, mobs are no longer selectable after fully looted. So previously, even if something was fully looted, you could still target them, meaning that you spent a lot of time trying to re-loot mobs that have already been looted. That has been corrected. Items reserved for other players now say they are locked and to try it again in a few minutes. It probably shouldn't say a few minutes because it doesn't actually take a few minutes. It's about a minute and a half. Unique items already looted will say that you looted them if they dropped again. Examples of that would be, say, the lore items that drop. You can't use a lore item twice, which means that you also, under normal circumstances, can't pick it up twice. Although there is a bit of a bug occasionally that does make you pick it up twice, and you can see that in my lore video. It is also quite a bit harder with these new loot changes now with lesser bone marrow to keep up with repairs. Also, there's currently no way to repair an item without using Gala if it's at 0 durability. And this particularly is an issue for new players, as there's quite a bit of friction involved in setting up a token allowance, especially for new players that don't really understand the process. From a materium perspective, many mobs now drop far less materium. For example, the Brute used to drop 1000 materium regularly and occasionally would drop 6000 materium. Now he drops 50 materium regularly and occasionally drops 100 materium. The drop tables themselves have also changed, so mobs can drop different items, and even when they used to drop a consistent number of items, that has changed as well. An example there is the Alpha Buck doesn't always drop 2 lesser bone marrow. Sometimes they only drop 1. There is a bug that causes your materium to reset to 0, and if that happens, you may find it quite difficult to get enough materium to cover the cost of converting your bone marrow into repair powder. That on top of the fact that lesser bone marrow is now also more difficult to get. The combination of these issues with balance and the fact that there's a major bug can really stop you in your tracks. And I had that issue when we were farming the brutes, where I had tons of lesser bone marrow from previous events, and I should have had plenty of material, but because I got reset to 0, I didn't actually have enough repair powder to repair my gear when I was tanking. So in this video I see a bunch of dead goblin scavengers, and what I'm showing here is how easy it is to loot now. In this case, when they're all stacked up on top of each other, I can just constantly loot without even having to move. Previously you had to target each one, and if they're on top of each other, good luck actually looting them. So this is an enormous improvement over the previous system. New crafting recipes. We can see 4 new crafting recipes and 1 new item. The new recipes include the linen padding, the 3 different kinds of arrows, crush arrows, pierce arrows, and slash arrows, all part of bone arrows, and those are all made from the crude bone. The linen padding replaces bronze and tough leather armor. The crude bone drops from goblins, and they're used to make the new arrows. And also of note is the amount of leather, bars, linen, etc. increased to make rivets, buckles, straps, and fabric have all increased as well. And we'll see that in the next video here. The new arrows do a base damage of 5 to 10, plus you have to also add the wooden bow damage, which is 1 to 4, which means that there's a total base damage of 6 to 14 when using these particular arrows. These arrows, because they are specific damage types, can be increased with the appropriate type of armor. Bronze Brigandine full set will increase your pierce arrows. The tough leather set will increase your slash arrows, and the bronze plate armor set will increase your crush arrow damage. On top of all that, you can also use the Link of the Brittle, and if you're doing range damage, you tend not to be getting hit a whole lot, so using the Link of the Brittle in this case is relatively reasonable. When doing all of those things, and given the fact that you're not going to be using time to use bandages and kite and such, the arrows can be comparable to using tier 2 melee weapons, which means that range damage is now viable in at least some cases. So in this video we start off by going to the archery stand, and we see the new bone arrows, pierce, slash, and crush respectively. I then go over to the tannery stand and notice that the amount of crude leather and tough leather is increased from 1 to 2 to make each type of strap. We then look at the simple outfitter and we notice that, that was actually a bug right there. The linen padding is a new recipe, and also the linen fabric requires additional linen. Heading over to the simple forge, we can see that the bronze buckle and the bronze rivets no longer only require 1 bar, but require 3 and 2 respectively, and the tough leather uses the linen padding. Progression changes. You can now get a full set of tier 2 armor, namely the tough leather armor set, without having to mine for any tin or copper via the new linen padding. And this really helps new players because the jump from going from gambeson armor up to the tier 2 armors was a major roadblock for new players. A lot of them didn't know where to find the copper or the tin, and even if they did, they couldn't survive in the new areas, etc. Now the tin and copper have moved from Narrow's Landing into Skywound Mine. However, most of the mobs in Skywound Mine are dealing pierce damage, and the tough leather armor that you're provided with to go into there provides resistance to pierce damage, so the progression is smoothed out significantly. On the right hand side we can see the new material requirements for the tough leather armor, and that is particularly the linen padding, which is 2 required. Now the current progression for a new player goes something like this. Now there is some variation based on if the new player has any NFTs, the order they want to do things, etc. But assuming somebody has absolutely no NFTs and they want a relatively smooth progression curve, it goes like this. They start off by gathering barley, which they should get by going directly to the village of the Earl. They then mill it at the grain stand and go to the bakery to make bread. They then would gather some pine to craft each of the wooden weapons, although you'll focus mostly on the spear this early on. You can then gather some flax to craft the gambeson armor, and now you're fully set out to go hunting. On your way to do that, however, to improve your survivability, you're going to want to gather a bit of cotton, which will help you make some bandages. You can then kill wolves, which will drop lesser essence of slash, in addition to both crude and tough leather, which allow you to make the full tough leather set. After you do that, you can then go kill does and bucks to gather the other essences, lesser essence of crush and pierce, which will give you the requirements to make the gloves and boots for the bronze brigandine and bronze plate armors. Now you have everything you need to go into Skywound Mine to start gathering the tin and copper to make the bronze bars. which will complete the other armor sets. You'll also have bronze bars to help craft the bronze lantern so you can see when it's dark. Now, in the process of all this, you've probably had to kill a few goblins, but if you haven't, you can certainly start killing goblins now, and that'll help you gather lesser bone marrows, a bunch of materium, some crude bones, etc. You can then go around Skywound Mine and Narrows Landing and grab all the non-brute lore items. After you've gotten that, you can then start focusing on killing the brutes to get the remaining lore items, and if you're incredibly lucky, maybe even the Brutes Club. NPC and AI changes. First, with the AI changes, one thing of note, and we'll see a little bit later in the Skywound Mine video, is the brutes can now link their aggro, and that also causes leashing. So if one brute starts leashing, the brute that he is linked to can also leash. Also, there are also some various mob changes. One example, which I think is a little neat, is that if you go, say, into a wolf cage, you can see the wolves lying down all curled up, and when you get near them they get up and they try to eat you, but that's a change, and that's consistent with what we see with the does and the like. In terms of NPC changes, the mini bosses, which are the Alpha Buck and the Wisp, have had their hit points doubled. They're even more threatening for people that get caught off guard or newbies, and the Alpha Buck got reskinned again. This is the third iteration of the Alpha Buck. So on the bottom left there we see the original Alpha Buck, which looks like any other buck, that then got changed to an Alpha Buck that was a little bit darker, had a kind of a red tail and a red nose, kind of looked like Rudolph. And now we're into the newest Alpha Buck, which now has red antlers, the red nose, red eyes, kind of a red belly, and red hooves. It seems like the Alpha Buck is becoming more and more distorted. Maybe because of all the chaotic trace in the area or something. I'm sure there's some lore eventually that's going to be describing these changes to the mobs and why they're becoming stronger and their appearance is changing. Also, the Goblin Spearmen in the Skywound Mines got a massive hit point increase. They're way stronger and they do way more damage. Their damage, if you're not wearing the right armor, can kill you in 2 to 3 hits from full health. Also, mobs kind of across the board have had their resistances significantly increased. So if you're attacking a mob with anything other than what they're weak against, it'll take substantially more hits now, which also means more durability, which means you burn through your repair powders faster, and the repair powders are now harder to get, and even if they weren't harder to get, the materium to turn them into repair powders is also hard to get. It's becoming much more difficult in the world of Mirandus. So in this video we see a Alpha Buck minding his own business until I decide to go over and whack him with a club, because that's what you got to do to Alpha Buck. They're kind of like piñatas, and you whack them so much and a bunch of loot pops out of them. Unfortunately, not quite as much loot as they used to drop. Now you can see he takes a lot of hits. He's also doing quite a bit of damage. He got me all the way down to half health there. And he only dropped 25 materium and 1 lesser bone marrow. Skywound Mine changes. So in that image, that's a real image. Those are not statues. We can see a bunch of green brutes in addition to a bunch of yellow brutes and a whole lot of goblin spearmen. If you were to go and attack that, you would die in about 1 second. There are some new areas added to Skywound Mine, although they're not fully functional as of yet. And in the first video after this slide, you'll see some of those areas and why I say that. Mobs are added throughout the entire zone. Specifically, the mobs on the east side tend to be quite a bit weaker because they don't include the brutes, and there are minimal goblin spearmen. The west side of the map is more designed for groups and/or raids. The mobs are considerably tougher and they're much more plentiful as well than Narrows Landing in there. If you're looking to fully clear the west side of Skywound Mine, you're going to at least need a small group, probably 4 or 5 people, although more is much easier. 10 to 15 people can burn through it without any significant issue. However, if you are in a small group, there's a few things you need to do. So first, you need good aggro control. You need a tank and an off tank, and that's shown in the upcoming video. quick target switching as well is very important because they will kill the tanks. And the reason for that is the tanks to tank brutes need to be wearing Bronze Brigandine armor. And Bronze Brigandine armor doesn't provide significant resistance against pierce damage, which the Goblin Spearmen do. If you're tanking, you're going to be using healing, which causes aggro to the Goblin Spearmen. They will run right to you, and if the brute is enraged and they hit you at the same time, you're pretty much dead instantly. Also, range pulling is very useful here. It tends to decrease aggro and additional adds. And line of sighting mobs is also very useful because mobs that can't see you typically don't aggro you. The biggest thing with Skywound Mine, and I think it's a little excessive, is the leashing. So mobs can't move very far at all, and I think the reason they did this was to limit cheesing of mobs, although they went a little overboard to say the least, because sometimes it feels like a mob takes a couple steps and then it runs away and instantly heals to full health. Especially given that this is an open world dungeon, some random person running by to say grab some lore items can completely interfere with your raid. So in this video I show some new areas, and this is in the middle of the map, and this is just south of the foreman's cabin, and we can see that there's like this, looks like a drawbridge, although as of yet I don't know any way to lower it down so that we can actually cross there, although I'm guessing that'll change in the future at some point. The next area is a little further south along the same area, and you kind of jump up over these rocks and you get to this opening, and you can see on the other side of the gorge there, it looks like you can go across, and there's maybe some, probably will have some lore items etc. over there. But at the present I'm just kind of looking around to see if there's anything here. This was when we were looking for the lore items originally. And then I decided to go across the bridge to the other side to see if anything was there, but of course you fall through the bridge, and you fall, and you fall, and you keep on falling to eventually either hit some rocks or you hit the water, and then you instantly die. Now this part here, we're going through the western mineshaft area, from the upper entrance to the main goblin camp, and we're going to be fighting some yellow brutes. And you can see a couple of my guildmates grab that one and I go grab the other. It's important for these brutes to be tanked separately so that you can survive the damage. Now once my group has killed that one, they join in fighting this one, and we fight this one until he's eventually dead. And this is just showing them attacking. Now this next part is a little further on, and what I want to show here is that those goblin brutes, they both leash at the same time because they have linked aggro. And in this last clip here, I was trying to solo a brute, and then suddenly like a dozen people jumped in on top of me, and apparently this was a community raid that I wasn't actually a part of, but because they were trying to kill my brute that I was trying to kill, I decided to actually join in. And while I was at it, I figured I'd record the video because it would make for some good content and people might be able to be aware of them in the actual raid. Now on to a cut above, which was the October event, and I wanted to go over the leaderboard here just to describe a few things. Also in the most recent AMA was the first AMA, they didn't actually show the leaderboard, so I figured I'd do that in that absence. The names are quite similar to the previous event, namely myself, I got ranked number 1. You can see Havoc again got ranked number 2, and Irina or Siru got number 3, Pixel Mouse clocked in at number 5, Green Dog, who originally I thought was going to be a real contender, kind of stopped after the first day and got number 6. Satoshi Shan did solid number 7. Get some Everglade people there in the namely Observer and Punjab clocking in the top 10. Atlas Scout number 11, good job. Rock this also got number 12. Wave Motion and Gulliver are 17 and 18 respectively, in addition to Danny 777. It seems as though Mom once again very much dominated the top of the leaderboards and kind of the leaderboard in general. Now, in terms of the actual scores, the scores were quite a bit lower than the last event, almost half on average, and that's because the goblins for the most part gave less chaotic trace. They averaged chaotic trace from 600 to 3300 instead of the 2500 or 3000 they had last event. The distribution of chaotic trace was much better this time, and all the goblin types were worth fighting. Where previously you didn't want to get off of a brute to go kill the other goblins if they added to your encounter, and in the event prior to this you didn't want to attack the brutes at all because they essentially gave you nothing. So in this case all of the mobs were worthwhile. I would say overall it was the best balance and most enjoyable of the goblin events, and I have an image there of the ultimate drop from a goblin brute, and that's 70,000 chaotic trace. And of note, the chaotic trace this time was kind of a mixed color chaotic trace. Looks kind of cool. Next on to the upcoming event here in the next couple days. Dusk of the Broken event NFTs. So on the far left there in the large image, that is the new mystery chest called Dusk of the Broken. There's 300 total supply. They're $30 each. And based on the most recent Mirandus Tall Haul, it looks as though they'll provide an archery mastery bonus in the future. Within these chests, there are 4 different NFTs, this time having the first legendary NFT. So starting at the top here, we have the uncommon Thyle Fad's Bowstring, 59% drop chance, and it provides 15% bonus event points and increases your speed by 0.25. Next we have Thiefeld's Arrowhead, which is a 30% drop chance, gives you a 25% event bonus and increases your speed by 0.5. Then we have the Epic Thiefeld's Arm Guard, which is a 10% drop chance, increases your event points by 35% and your speed by a solid 1. And the legendary 1% drop chance, and interestingly enough, all 3 of those dropped within the first 100 boxes. And it provides 65% bonus points and a 1.5 speed. Now, nowhere have I seen that equipping 3 items will give you a set bonus. It's also noted that you cannot equip the same item multiple times. Like for example, you can't fill 3 different trinket slots with all uncommons. You can only equip 1 of each item at a time. Now, in terms of the speed, based on my data mining, I did get these various values for speeds, and I've tried to correlate them to what I suspect those variables correspond to. And that would be a 3.3 for walking, 4.8 speed for having your weapon unsheathed while sprinting, and then sheathing your weapon and sprinting would be a 7.5 speed. Now all of these NFTs stack for speed, so let's say you had a rare and epic and legendary. You're one of the 3 people who was lucky enough to get that combination of trinkets. Then your adjusted speed would be 6.3, 7.8, and 10.5, which is interesting because that would mean that your unsheathed weapon speed is actually even faster than someone without any trinkets with their weapon sheathed, which would make kiting mobs highly effective, but more importantly will allow you to go from one mob to the next to kill them, because this event is highly related to speed, accuracy, and a bit of luck. Now, the Dusk of the Broken strategies. The event has changed from 4 days to 3 days, and I can kind of see why they've done this. So first off, the events were quite long. A lot of people were complaining, but also the event leaderboard didn't really change that much from 3 days to 4 days. There wasn't really any reason to prolong the competition. Now, in this particular event is completely different from all the other events. There are 3 different mobs that are going to be in Narrow's Landing. There's the stag, which you can see as kind of the deer looking thing in that picture. There will be 200 of them on the Narrow's Landing map at a time, and each one will give you 10 event points, and you just need to hit them once because they only have 1 hit point, and they will immediately respawn somewhere else on the map. Now the wisp, which is the mob on the far right there, that blue ball, there will be 100 of those on the map, and they give 50 event points. And then you have the tiny little golden bunny, which will have 50 on the map, and they'll give a whopping 500 event points. The issue with the Golden Bunny is they're quite fast and they're also quite tiny. As much as it would be nice to get those big event points, it'll be definitely the hardest to get. In terms of strategies, there are plentiful amounts of mobs. There will be 350 of the event mobs on the Narrows Landing map at any one time. So having exemplars all over the map won't be particularly useful because you'll likely never be very far from a mob. Now, if you're using arrows, you don't want to waste your time on bow and arrows because these mobs only have 1 hit point, so use wooden arrows. And in terms of weapons, you want maximum range. So you're going to want to use either the wooden spear or the bronze coated spear. Now, the wooden spear is a lot cheaper and you can just dispose of them. However, it does have less durability, so you'll be spending more time replacing weapons and the like. The event NFTs in this event are very powerful, and if you want to rank well, you will definitely need them, so I definitely recommend purchasing them if you're interested in doing that. Larger exemplars as well, like the orc and elf, will have an advantage because of their sight, so they can see from higher up, meaning that they can see farther or above the foliage, making various mobs easier to detect, specifically the golden rabbit. For halflings and dwarves that are at the height of the foliage, they'll have difficulty seeing these mobs. Also, I see that this could be quite a toxic event, given that if a mob spawns, you'll have a lot of people trying to block other people's shots, standing in front of them and such, so that the other person can't get the kill. The other thing is you'll be moving around a lot and pretty much always sprinting, meaning that you'll be going through food at a very high rate. So stocking up on massive amounts of bread and or various meats is advisable. Now, from my own perspective, as someone who's done fairly well in the events up to this point, this one is definitely going to be much harder for me, and potentially the first one where I don't actually win. And I'll say why. So first off, my Brute Club I win button is no longer valid. The Brute Club gave me a massive advantage for the most part, because it did a lot more damage, but doing more damage on mobs that only have 1 health is a moot point. I also wasn't lucky to be one of those 3 to get a legendary NFT. That puts me at a 65% disadvantage. Also, you need to be fast in this competition, and the first hit kills. And given that I'm literally the furthest away from the possible server, that's a major disadvantage because my ping is high. Few things that typically would help me as well is I have multiple exemplars, and I usually have fairly massive stocks of consumables, specifically bandages. And in this case, those things likely will not be beneficial. So in summary, this is going to be a real competition. If I want to aim for a high placement, I need to be really on point this time. The next slide is the store mystery chest sale progression, and perhaps more importantly, how that correlates with players and rewards and the like. The amount of gala spent is once again increasing, and this is especially notable given that the newer crates have not been listed as long and the current event hasn't even started yet, so you'd expect even more sales. If we look at the chart on the top right, we can see that the very first sale, A Glimpse into the Unknown, sold the most, which you would expect given it was the first event, and that means that those have been for sale for the longest. They also have ongoing utility, the rings you can use, and they still provide you a crush resistance bonus. After that, the next event, the Humble Beginnings, decreased a bit, and the Desperate Measures decreased again. After that, we started to see an increase again, and this is due to a few reasons in terms of gala spend. One is that the gala token price decreased significantly, so the amount of gala you had to spend to buy event NFTs increased quite a bit. The cut above event also included Townstar and Vexy players because it was a cross-game event. The most recent event also had higher box prices and a much lower gala token price. In addition to more players being interested in playing, we are seeing that the amount of gala spent is increasing. Now, in terms of the crates sold versus the US dollar reward, as you can expect, the amount of crates that are selling is decreasing proportionally to the amount of the reward. Now, I'm sure the devs are probably watching this and saying, oh, but we've been increasing the reward. Yes, but that's only slightly in gala. At the same time, the price of a box from A Glimpse in the Unknown averaged 1,350 gala, and the price of a box in the Dusk of the Broken at the time of recording was 3,950. meaning that the cost of the items increased by 192%, but in the same time, the rewards only increased by 25%, meaning that the ROI has decreased substantially. Actually, at the present time, even for someone with aiming for rank 1 rewards, given the cost of the boxes to fill those slots, you're at a substantial net negative expected value, even for the rank 1 spot. Now, you can get extremely lucky buying the boxes and say get a legendary and epic and simply sell them for a profit, but for the vast majority of people that are looking simply for an ROI perspective, you are at a net negative expected value. Now, if you are interested in having these NFTs on a long-term basis for their future mastery benefits, etc., then that significantly offsets that potential negative expected value because of their ongoing utility. Long story short, kind of the summary here is the reward value in US dollars is directly proportional to the number of crates sold, which are priced in US dollars. That the longer an item is listed for sale, the more that it sells, and ongoing utility of items increases the number of crates sold. NFT minting. I very much like the NFT minting. I will say that the system is very smooth. It's also fast to use. Certainly in Web3, this is perhaps one of the best systems I've seen. I'm actually very, very impressed by it. It's also a way to generate play to earn, given that these minted items are currently selling for on average about 5 times mint price. Although you have a personal quota of 2 that you can mint, it does allow you to generate some funds. Now, this first mint included tier 2 chest pieces and tier 2 weapons, in addition to the Brutes Club, of course, and 150 of each, and all items of tier 2 have been fully minted. Of course, not all the Brute Clubs have been fully minted and probably never will, simply because there are nowhere close to 150 Brutes Club in existence and they're incredibly hard to get. In terms of minting, and this is directly corresponding to people's perceived utility at the time of the mint, was the spear, followed by the sword, and then tough leather, then bronze brigandine, followed by bronze plate, and finally the hammer. Now, the hammer at that time wasn't particularly useful. Now, with the Skywound mine and the increased resistances, the hammer is now much more useful than it was at the time of this minting, and I suspect if that happened right now, the hammer would have minted out much earlier. With each upcoming update, we will have a chance of having some new mints. This next one, I suspect, although this is purely speculation, will be the tier 2 boots and gloves to complete the full set. And of note, they've recently increased the bronze requirements, which are components in these additional boots and gloves, with the exception of the tough leather set, of course. It will be harder to mint these items. One other thing which I'm not particularly fond of, and I do hope that they change it, is when you hit the user minting quota. So on the picture on the right, you can see the bronze coated spear. I minted 2 of them, and it says the user minting quota for this item has been reached. So that's great to know that. However, when that happens, you can no longer see the global minting quota. Let's say the global mint was 50 out of 150. As a player, you want to know how many items have minted in total, to know when it's going to be fully minted, to kind of assess the value, etc. It would be nice to also list the global minting quota even after you've met your personal quota, just to provide information on how the minting is going. And how can we have a review video without the bug slide? Starting with the major gameplay breaking bugs. And many of these bugs I'm mentioning are bugs that have persisted. I'm simply reiterating them because they're majorly affecting gameplay. The first one is the materium going to 0. And this one previously wasn't much of an issue because you could just go kill a single alpha bot or a wisp and then you had enough materium to get back on your feet. That's no longer the case given how hard materium is now to acquire. And this has only happened with this milestone, is if you get reset to 0, occasionally all your materium simply comes back at some point in the future. It could be an hour later, it could be the next day. I don't know what's causing it to come back, but I'm happy that it does come back. But what I would prefer is it just didn't go away in the first place. This is something that definitely needs to be corrected. The next one, anyone who's been playing any significant time definitely knows about, and that's the cogwheel bug, where you look on your weapons and you see what looks like a gear or a cogwheel, and makes it so you can't actually unsheath your weapon. And this happens almost every time if you're quickly switching between characters. Say you go into disconnect and then reconnect. Very frequently happens specifically when harvesting cotton, and occasionally happens when randomly fighting enemies. This one is incredibly annoying because it completely disables you. This last one in the major gameplay bugs is a new one, or at least a new variation of a previous one, and that's what I call the Skywound Mine mass statue bug. And I've noticed this happen a couple of times now. And seeing statues or kind of frozen mobs is not something particularly uncommon. However, in Skywound Mine, it's at a completely different level. The entire zone fills with mobs, hundreds and hundreds of statues everywhere, to the point where the zone becomes unbelievably laggy. And there's so many mobs that are statues, you can't really tell which mobs are not statues versus which mobs are actually attackable. And we'll see that in the upcoming video here. The next part is some minor bugs, and some of these may not even be actual bugs, but I think they are at least. The first is the Calamite's log name. In that particular log entry, they describe a lot of events that one could describe as calamities. So I would suspect that the Calamite's log name actually should have been Calamity's log. So I think that's a typo. It's missing an I after the T. The next, which we can see in the letter to the miner there on the picture on the right, it says Goblin Spearmans as the creature that drops that particular lore item. And the plural of spearman is spearmen as opposed to spearmans. So I think they should have either just called it Goblin Spearman as the name of the mob that drops it, or if they wanted to refer to all of them, probably should have been Goblin Spearmen. Now this is a minor issue, but a little polish never hurt on the game. The last is a bug that I've mentioned multiple times, and it seems like it would be really easy to correct, although it has persisted for many months now. And that's the Awaken 3-set bonus information still has overlay issues. That image on the bottom right there is that the awakened information mixes in with your actual paper doll equipment, so you can't really read any of it. Now, interestingly enough, if you click, say, the Mastery tab and then scroll over, that problem isn't an issue. So there's some issue with your actual paper doll equipment not being set at the right transparency level, or something along those lines. Either way, it'd be something that I think could easily be corrected, and probably at this point should be. So this is kind of just a fun video showing a major bug within Skywound Mine, which I've seen multiple times. The vast majority of these mobs are not actual real living mobs, although some of them are. When I first entered Skywound Mine, I was pretty worried because I thought they dramatically buffed the zone. However, in reality, it's just a issue where for some reason all the mobs start becoming statues, and this can even apply to players. Like, I even saw a statue of myself within the mine on my same character, which was kind of interesting. Like a mirror image of myself just standing around trying to attack. And even my Lantern of the Sun on my bugged statue version of myself was still active. Now, I don't see it in this particular video, but that did happen. And this applies to the entire mine. Like, literally the whole mine of all areas is completely filled with statues. And you're probably watching this video and you're saying, this video seems pretty laggy. And that is the case. It's not just like my connection. This is the actual zone itself. This is mostly server lag. And it makes it pretty much unplayable. And that was a real person there, and you can see this applies literally through the whole zone. We're all the way to the bosses area now. All different, 3 different types of goblins. And look at all the brute. Imagine if those were all real mobs. It'd be wild. And to finish this off with my final thoughts. This milestone update was definitely the most significant of the updates so far. We've seen a ton of new NFTs, new mobs, new recipes, a fully built out Skywound mine, balancing changes, a completely new redesigned event, and even mob changes. I have to say I'm very impressed with the dev team and the rate and the quality of the content that we're seeing here. I've noticed on OpenSea there's been a dramatic increase of NFT buying kind of across the board. The prices in ETH have also increased on many NFTs in relation to this. Now that is somewhat in part given the fact that the price of ETH in US dollars has decreased. However, I'd like to think that the improving fundamentals of the game is at least having some impact in this regard. Next month is shaping up to also be a significant change where they're going to potentially have the first iteration of the Deeds tech and the fully completed Skywound mine. I notice within the MOM Discord there's a greatly improved player sentiment, and I continue to see new players coming back to the game on a daily basis. I know within the game itself I see a lot of people that are new names and some fresh faces. Overall, I'm looking quite positive on things. This next event will be very different. I may or may not make a video specific to this next event after the fact. However, at the very least, I will add that in addition to my next review video, being the Milestone 13 review video and the last review video of this year. Again, if anyone's interested in the lore items, my lore video link is in the description, and I will leave it there. I hope everyone's enjoyed and have a good day. Goodbye.